Social Currency, powered by Sunrise Banks, is a podcast that introduces you to some of the most innovative change makers in finance, technology, and all things social impact. We walk through how they're opening doors, reimagining industries with a focus on community, conservation, and accessibility. I'm your host, Tyler Seydel.
And I'm Eric Schurr. From social entrepreneurs to compliance innovators and payments pioneers, we share the stories behind a growing movement working toward a world where opportunity is within everyone's reach.
I'm Tyler Seydel.
And I'm Eric Schurr. And today we're going to talk about mission-driven organizations and how to generate financial wellness for those who are unbanked or underserved.
And our guest today is the one and only Kyle Rushman. He is the Vice President of Prepaid Sales and Business Development at Usio. Usio, in my mind, is a FinTech first responder. They're a vertically integrated processor program manager with one of the most sophisticated platforms in the industry today. Kyle has more than 20 years of experience in sales and business development from places like UniRush all the way up to his present role here today.
Kyle, we're absolutely thrilled that you could join us today. I have a question for you. Tell us how you started off in all of this. Like, what was the road that brought you into financial services?
Yeah, well, Tyler, Eric, so excited to be here. So thanks again for the opportunity to come on with you guys. So I started in this career path at UniRush Financial Services, as you mentioned. And so, as you guys might know, it's a financial service company that was very focused on the underserved, the underbanked. Russell Simmons was a co-founder along with a gentleman named David Rosenberg, who had a business in Cincinnati, which is where I live. So I started and really learned a lot about this industry and really the amount of folks who really struggle with just daily financial basic services and needs that, maybe you and I kind of, had at an early age. And so really started to dive into that industry. I had ran business development there, trying to get our product into retail. And so at the time, and this is going way, way back in the early, prepaid and GPR days, it was a pay-as-you-go plan only. There was a $19.95 activation fee once you got your card, if it was through a media ad or radio ad that was out there. And so we really wanted to try to go more into the community and learn from individuals what product sets were going to be, of value to them. At the time, Walmart was coming out with their products, which, allowed the industry to really move forward and change. But it was trying to get the product where our members were. And at that point, if they received a card, from one of our retail locations, it was going to be activated at 100%. And then we could start teaching them kind of the basics of, financial services and financial empowerment. So I learned a lot there and was very fortunate to be with a great team at an early stage in the career, which led me to a company called Vantif after RushCard and Green Dot had a joint venture and ended up selling to them that business. Did that for about 4.5 years, and I've been at Usio for 8. So kind of got both sides of the consumer market and then obviously leaning into kind of the corporate commercial applications of prepaid, which is a lot of what we focus on here today at Usio.
So you've been in the space for maybe 20 years, maybe a little bit more than that. What's one thing about money that people think they understand, but they're completely wrong about?
I think a lot of it's just the digital nature of it. And, the numerous conversations over these times, I think people want to call us and purchase some of these credit cards, to use for the market, which is obviously a completely different product and kind of prepaid incentive disbursement, solutions. And so just maybe some of the terminology. I think the other thing too is there's so many broad use cases for prepaid and the industries we support and the different configurations and customization of that. So I think a lot of the innovation really kicked off with these prepaid type products and solutions that a lot of us are using today, and it's obviously a lot more common. And so again, starting 20 years ago, roughly, and early on in this space, and just seeing a lot of the transition has been fun. It's been challenging as technology continues to change and a lot of new things are coming to market. But I really think it's just a kind of a knowledge of what all of these products and solutions can do to really benefit and give value to not only organizations, but to individuals themselves.
I think that's well stated. You're absolutely right. In the digital revolution that kind of surrounds the same. People will say you don't accidentally end up in the place that you land. And so we know you were spending time at Unirush. What kind of pulled you into that world in the first place, saying it no differently, Kyle? Was it just this affinity to want to get in there and help, or was it just right place, right time, or kind of color that in?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to go back to kind of that, initial entryway into it, and it was a little bit of a difference of an industry shift for me. Um, I graduated with business marketing and actually a biology associates. I was looking at pre-med. So I was looking at being an eye doctor at one point. And then I got into some business classes and really, enjoy that aspect of it on the marketing side. And so my first job out of college was actually working for a small business that built and designed uh, exhibits for trade shows. And so I was, 22, 23 years old, traveling to Vegas and New York and Chicago and all over the place for these conferences and exhibits. So I saw a lot of these different industries that were out there. And kind of technology and financial services was just one of them I leaned, towards a little bit. And then got a call from a recruiter, and it was this position locally. It was a financial service company with, kind of a celebrity, type, part owner of that. And kind of jumped in, never looked back. Just really dove into the industry and, like I said, the innovation side of it. Try to immerse myself as much as I could. I actually, and I'll kind of pull this a little bit full circle where I landed here at Usio. During my time at RushCard, probably as you guys maybe did, or some of the viewers out there, I signed up and collected, if you will, every card out there from a market research standpoint. And so the Magic Johnson cards, the Susie Orman cards, the Green Dots, the Net Spins, the Account Nows, right? I mean, all those, probably still have a handful here somewhere. But really, try to learn, the whole aspect of what consumers, need to have from an information standpoint of view to kind of sign up and have the product be successful. And I remember Akimbo Financial come in, into play in 2011 and signed up for that card and got a chance to know Houston Frost, who was the co-founder there. And really had an appreciation for the product and the tech that they had built, with this, general purpose use product. It was kind of this multi-card platform for, modern households. And so I have 4 kids and I was using it myself internally, for kind of managing just little budgets, with the family. And so, got a chance to know that team and obviously that was an acquisition that Usio made back in 2014. And so I was fortunate to be a part of that group and really, part of a great product that in its infancy, and we're continuing to grow and expand on that. And that's really what led me, here today.
Wow. Wow. So was there a kind of an inflection point, or what was that big decision in your maybe career that felt risky at the time, but it ended up really defining your path?
It's a great question. I've always wanted to kind of continue to be a student of the product and the space in the market. Whether that's going to shows, conferences, whether that's engaging, with our partners, working closely with, MasterCard and the team. And I don't know if it was a risk per se, but it was kind of a decision that we really wanted to focus on these social impact programs. There's so many different use cases within prepaid. There's, refunds that are going away from checks onto card. There's, promotions that organizations run, buy tires, get a prepaid card for as a promotion. It's, small businesses that want to do, incentives for their staff. And we were fortunate kind of early on within COVID to make a strong impact with some of these kind of emergency cash aid assistance, as you mentioned, this first responders in FinTech that, I love when we kind of had that conversation there. And it really, allowed us to kind of position ourselves in the market to kind of be that first call, be a call to go to when there's, folks in time of need. And there's, a bunch of examples I could kind of dive into, but, I'm really, kind of glad and appreciate that that's the path that it's taken us as a company. But also I think for me personally, and really focusing on, again, these social impact programs and the value that it brings, to the community, but also to the nonprofits, the cities, the municipalities, the organizations that we work with.
Kyle, I think that now's the time. In the introduction, we kind of referred to you folks as a FinTech first responder. And I know that intimately simply because of how involved I am. Maybe we take a moment to unpack a couple of those use cases or maybe a couple scenarios where you folks really felt yourself on the cutting edge of providing help at the time that it was needed. Is there any examples maybe that come to mind that you could share with the audience?
Yeah, I could kind of dive into quite a few. I'll try to keep it brief just from a timing. But so one of the first calls that we got was around COVID and kind of the uncertainty and the lockdown. And actually our office was on that early lockdown because our CEO found that he had COVID from a trip that he went to. And so it was office doors are closed, kind of come in and kind of, fumigate the place. Our VP of operations kind of took a box of cards that we had in the office as stock. And, thank goodness that, that happened because there was a call that we got from MasterCard, and the first project was called Project Safe Haven. And it was an organization through the mayor's office of Los Angeles. They were working with domestic violence victims who were working with case managers and kind of in a secure, safe place. And they wanted to provide them with $100 that they could use for kind of food and basic needs. And so, as you mentioned, we're a processor program manager. So we kind of, own a lot of the technology and we can stand up these programs quickly. We were able to ship those cards out overnight. We were able to put those merchant category code restrictions in place, for that organization. And they were going to reload this for a period of time. And that led us to other programs when there was a condominium collapsed in Coral Gables, Florida. And they wanted cards to support the families that were displaced for buying food, buying clothes, since they, just had their home taken away from them. There was the same thing that happened in the Bronx in New York, where there was a fire, and a lot of these folks were misplaced. And then we got into the vaccine era, where it was, here's these organizations that were, providing an incentive for people to come and get vaccinated. And so we could kind of get back to some normalcy. And so we did that through the New York City Economic Development Corporation. And I think that's when we really saw the power of scale with what our platform and our team could support. It was almost $100 million, 1 million cards roughly that we put out, within a pretty short period of time. And obviously all the, things that go into that, from a distribution, fulfillment, support, scalability, testing our virtual, products in market at scale. And so, being able to send these cards that fast and securely, and have the individuals being able to provision these in the mobile wallets and start to use those right away. And so that led us into a lot of these, larger programs. We worked with the state of California, their Department of Social Services, on a large grant. We've done a lot of these, basic income guarantee programs. We worked with the U.S. Department of Agriculture for the food and farm worker grants. And most recently, we worked with the New York State Nurse Association for a hardship grant. There was a lot of nurses that went on strike, and they needed to get funds quickly. So, going back to kind of those early COVID days, there's just so many of these programs that we've been called on to help support, and we've been able to, launch these. I think a lot of it's just through the fact that we've been able to deliver, and it's a testament to our partnership, at the bank side, and what we do with MasterCard and our team, to be able to do those, programs quickly and at scale, and with the security in mind, and kind of the speed of what innovation can allow us to support.
Sure. Kyle, in the prepaid world, as you just illustrated, Usio is certainly known as a program manager, but the company really has 4 centers of excellence: the payment facilitation, or PayFac. It's got the ACH capabilities. It's got the card issuing, which you've described in detail, and then it's got something called output solutions. Can you briefly describe these and maybe talk about the thought process that allowed Usio to evolve into these 4 somewhat distinct but somewhat unified areas.
Yeah. So thanks for bringing that up, Eric, because I think that's something that really separates Usio apart from some of our competitors and just the diversity of what we can offer as a company in the fintech landscape. So we are a payment processing company. We're a payment facilitator. So we work with software vendors to integrate and embed our payment solution into those companies. And so, some examples of that is, and this has, been a big trend, I think in that acquiring space, instead of, knocking on a door of a veterinarian or a hospital or a dentist or a small business, you work with those software companies to embed those solutions within that. And so that's been a really growing business for us on the acquiring side. Why I love that so much from what we're doing here on the issuing is they complement each other so much. And so if you're a software that's building a platform to manage donations, people are giving money to raise for various things, we can help support them on the acceptance of those donations through our PayFlag platform, but also through ACH processing and other means. And I can kind of dive into that a little bit. But we can also help them, disperse those funds out and kind of have, overarching transparency for both those ends of the money flow coming in and coming out. And then if we need it to provide transparency, insight, merchant category controls, kind of data analytics on where those funds are being spent, since we're the processor, we can provide that for our partners very easily. And so on the ACH side, we've got a direct connection to a Fed terminal. We have multiple different ODFIs that we work with. We're obviously getting into RTP and FedNow and some of these other, faster payment channels. But we also own our own, check printing company. You mentioned Output Solutions. And so that was another acquisition. It's all of our own facility. We've been partnering with you guys, on that space and some others. Obviously with these, executive orders and some of these, changes in the industry, checks are becoming a little bit less and less as a means to, send out funds. But we saw it as an opportunity to kind of work alongside a lot of our other, municipal and nonprofit and city and state partners. And an example I can give is, if the county of Los Angeles, says, hey, we need to send out, 500,000 people who owe a parking fine or a toll fine. We'll process that, communication. We'll embed a QR code. You would scan it. It would pull up your information. It goes to a hosted payment page, and then we process that transaction. So we can kind of help facilitate, organizations on both sides of that from the product lens. And then obviously, we have this Usio One strategy. And so it's, providing, kind of one entry point through our partners, but giving them multiple different products, through ACH, through check and output, through card issuing, to really work with, kind of one entity. And I think the other thing I'll follow up with that is you're starting to see a lot of these disbursements wanting to have more, choices and availability to the end user. And so whether that's, spinning up and sending out funds, virtually, but then allowing that user to, move it to their Venmo account or their PayPal account or their bank account, or send a check, to themselves or to somebody else, or order a physical card. So you can kind of start with this digital first, but then give them choices to how they can use and manage those funds. And so we're starting to see a lot of interest with that product as some others are seeing it, to really kind of help streamline that disbursement, product, but still giving them all the choices. And the fact that we do that all in-house really gives us that strategic advantage. I mean, it's our own print facility that's printing those checks. It's our own ACH processing platform that's, moving those funds out. So it's been a really exciting time for us here on that front.
Yeah, and having visited the facility, gotta say it's truly a sight to see.
Yeah.
The investment in equipment and just the throughput that can be accomplished is just amazing. It's absolutely fantastic. You talked a little bit earlier about some of the use cases that appeared during COVID and how you took advantage of those, and it really helped propel the business forward. How's the notion of value changed for your clients and their customers since COVID? I mean, we hear that that event really changed expectations. I'm wondering if you've seen that, and then what factors do you think are driving any of those value shifts?
Yeah, I mean, great question again. Obviously, I think it did really fast track a lot of the digital payments out there, and just kind of less and less cash. I mean, you see businesses and organizations that are moving cashless. Whole industries. I mean, I'm sure we've all seen it. I went to a single A baseball game in Dayton, Ohio, and they didn't take cash. And so you take your kids up there, and Dad, I can't take a 20. I gotta come back. And luckily, they all have one of our Kimbo card products that we use. And so, movie theaters and amusement parks and water parks. And so we've got, partners in different types of use cases that have really pushed that digital payments or that card-based payment, into that market. I think another thing is it's really even trying to be more, eco-friendly, if you will, and moving things more towards a digital and not even have to disperse, these plastic cards or send checks or other forms of payments there. So that's been interesting to kind of see and propel that. I think one thing that we also saw early on, where it was really driving down into kind of the SMB space, the business space, is we had a partner we were working with that they would pay all of their pizza drivers, their delivery drivers, their tips and reimbursements, and they would just every night cash them out, get the cash out of the drawer, and make their payments. Well, nobody was eating in those restaurants, and so they had to find another way to do that, which ended up integrating with some of our card-based solutions. So I think it really fast-tracked kind of the amount of versatility and innovation that these card products can do. And not only that, but just the added value that I think it brings when you really look at it from the full kind of end-to-end life cycle. I'll give another example. I was recently at the bowl season conference in San Antonio. So it was for all the college bowl games. And, all these players get a certain per diem and allotment of funds. And some of these are personalized gifts, that they do, or, some bowls will just, kind of give them, like an Amazon card that they could use, or kind of allow them to go pick a menu of items, an Xbox, a massage gun, just various, types of products. And, through one of our partners, started to do a branded custom card for the bowl game. And they would provide them that cash onto a card. And, obviously that says a little bit of that personal touch, could have their name on it with the bowl game. But I think the intangibles of you're starting to see those players and those families using those funds locally, and they're in those cities. And so there's an economic impact, to that. There's, hey, here's a couple of stores that were, benefits of that. They were, kind of going to these local, mom and pop, bars and restaurants, or they were going to a jewelry store, into the mall. And so, you really kind of start looking into some of the intangible values of these social impact programs and how these organizations can kind of zero in, not only that, hey, we put $10 million, on cards to be used for this specific purpose. And of that $10 million, we can show you that 50% was food, 20% was clothes, 10% was paying bills, kind of those high-level merchant categories. But drilling into and say 98% of those dollars stayed local. They were being spent, within the local community. And I think there's a ton of value with that. And there's, even other things that you can maybe work with some of those local businesses to really, and heighten, more participation, more private public funding that can go in there to support those. And with AI and what that's going to do to a lot of job loss, that was a big thing that we saw at the big conference, which is the Basic Income Guarantee conference that we went to, because those robots and machines that are taking away some of the jobs, the Uber drivers, the manufacturer workers, the frontline workers, they're not going to local coffee shops. They're not, staying in local housing there. And so how do you continue to kind of pump money into the local economy and being able to be on the forefront of looking at some of those applications from, what our product capabilities and some of that data analytics can support?
Sure. And it's interesting that you bring up the data-driven insights, because that's been such a topic of conversation for almost a generation now, and yet we still know that the more time we spend in the data, the better the insights, the better we can either demonstrate the value or test into the next set of value, which is so important at this, during these junctures.
Yeah, and I would say just maybe one thing to kind of, drill into that a little bit is, obviously probably we're a little biased because we like the card issuing aspect of the business and what it can do. And you really don't get that insight if you're sending funds to somebody's Venmo account or their PayPal account, or sending them a check, or even just right to their existing debit card or bank account. So, if that is something that organizations, have a lot of interest in, and to your point, it's been a conversation for a while, being able to say we can support all those initiatives, but it's our own card platform, so we can help kind of drive that change and really get these different types of programs, stood up pretty quickly and continue to scale that,
Sure,
business.
sure. Banks. So as Tyler and I talk pretty much on a weekly basis, we're thinking about, and we're always talking about disruption all the time, particularly in ways that our potential business model as a bank may be disrupted 5, 10 years out. Knowing that Usio has had a strategy over time of investing in proprietary technology that's innovative, and also being deliberate around finding unique and attractive markets, how do you see payment companies like Usio potentially being disrupted over the next 5 to 10 years?
Um, I would say you're probably going to see more of the larger financial institutions, maybe through acquisitions, really continue to invest in that space. And so, what does that mean for us? The size company that we are, I think we got to just continue to focus on, the programs that we support. And, what we're really good at doing is these, disbursement type social impact programs, but also, providing those users, more of a long-term use product, a general purpose, type product. And so I think if we kind of stay there, we're going to continue to grow in the space. But, I think blockchain is obviously going to do stuff. And I know, Tyler, you spent a ton of time with this. I mean, I just scratched on the surface. Houston, our chief product officer, dives into this a little bit more. But, I think there's just going to be other payment channels that are going to be a lot cheaper to move, funds around. What does that do to the networks, and just kind of how things, the businesses around the economics of just acceptance of payments. And if you're using these different channels and the speed of that, what does that do to the economic impact of the business? I know one thing that from a futuristic standpoint of view that Lewis, our CEO, talks about is the biometrics aspect of it. And so, payments that could literally be done by just walking into a store and walking out, and you have a token that's assigned, to you as the individual. I mean, you see this obviously with airports, with business travel, just the clear, and now TSA has the touchless where you just open your eyes and walk through. So I think that's going to have a lot of disruption, within the market. So you can be kind of on the cutting edge of that. I think that's going to really stand you up for success. And I think the other thing too that was interesting is at that conference I mentioned, the bowl season conference. They were doing that for entry into the stadium. And so you think about, University of Michigan has 110,000 people in the big house that are walking through and all doing it in a short period of time. And a lot of the, students are coming in droves, for maybe or an early, start to the day, and, fumbling through their phones to try to get their ticket application. And they're starting to put up these little, biometric scanning where you can just kind of walk through, and maybe that's also your student ID. Maybe that's something that, if you are a student athlete, what they talked about was you walk to the cafeteria after a practice, you don't have any of your, wallet or phone on with you. And so it says, hey, Eric, you're one of 3 meals, is here, and you've got 2 more left. Obviously from a security from being in the classroom, and knowing, where things are if there's an event. And so I think biometrics just in general, but it will have some disruption in the payment side. And we want to, try to be on the forefront of that as well.
I think what you started to unpack there, Kyle, it gets exciting for all the reasons. When we're talking blockchain, trustless systems by which we'll process transactions, reduce potential costs, and it has elements of scale that today's systems don't. And so you're right. We've had a lot of almost price setting, price floors, price ceilings. The mechanisms by which we move money today, they've been around so long that it's not market collusion. Nobody would want to put words to it in such a way. But at the end of the day, what we have come up with are kind of the mean averages of what people are expecting to pay. And then you enter with something like cryptocurrency or blockchain, and that absolutely is going to revolutionize things because we know the regulators don't like junk fees. They generally look at any fee on a card product with suspicion. And so, how are you going to find ways to kind of improve your revenue? Well, simply through maybe operational novelty, doing something different, things that other folks have not embraced yet. That's going to be a first market mover advantage that maybe others aren't seeing yet. I think what you're starting to point out, though, and you guys live on the processing side, is exactly right. Whoever could come up with that model, that system, that approach, that process, you're going to create money where money doesn't exist today, and that's profound in so many ways.
Yeah.
The one question I think that's almost bubbling on the top of my mind, and it's not around where it's going. You've mentioned this a few times. People still use checks, Kyle. Let's unpack that. What does that look like in terms of check velocity, volume? What do you guys think is happening in that space? I know if we rewind the clock 10 years ago, I think people would say, checks, they won't be here in 2020. No, they're still here.
Yeah, I mean, still here. I mean, I think it's a generational thing. You're going to have the younger market, individuals that don't even know what a checkbook is. And so I think over time that'll really phase it out. I mean, it's, I'll give that example I mentioned earlier around the New York State Nurses Association. When we had, got a call from them and one of their partners, it was, we've got 15,000 nurse families that we need to send a check to like ASAP. They're going to get $500. And obviously we own our own check printing company and we were like, we can support it. But that weekend, it was like a call on a Friday. That was the most pieces of mail we printed in a day. We broke a record at Output Solutions. And so Cy and his team, Eric, that you met, were obviously busy, doing that. It was like 850,000 pieces of mail. And we also had like a cold front coming into San Antonio. So there was some ice on the ground and people were struggling to get to work. And so, we had let the Nurses Association know that we could support it, but it might be a week or so until we can get these checks out. But if you have an email address or a phone number, we could send these payments out, virtually. And then if they wanted to cut themselves a check to use it, they could do that. They could click a button in our kind of web application experience, or they can move it to their Venmo account or PayPal account. And what we saw was the amount of dollars that were spent within that first week, was almost 70%. So people, by Monday, were getting a notification, basically one business day, that they had funds available that they could start accessing and using. And then we could break it down and see which ones those folks, moved to their Venmo account or purchased it and, through the card or adding it to their mobile wallet. But so I think to answer your question, Tyler, about checks, you're going to get some of those where maybe the mindset is, hey, I need to get money out to people. Maybe they were used to doing it through checks, knowing that there's other applications in the event of a strike, which is we can get money to feed people quickly so they can kind of, feed their families, within a day's notice. I mean, we saw the same thing with SNAP benefits delays, calls that we got about, can we, provide some cards to these families and make sure they're for food purposes, and we could stand up those and put those MCC restrictions in place right away. And so I think you're going to continue to see that shift where checks are just going to become less and less.
Yeah, I think when you said it's generational, I think you were spot on. I mean, it absolutely stands to reason. And then when you look at generational patterning, you have checks, you have cards, and then you have wallet providers, saying it no differently, where bank accounts aren't the number one account opened, right? It's all of these ancillary kind of payment modalities, these cash apps, these other neobanks that are trying to participate in this space, saying it no differently. And so I agree with you. It's profound, and I think the answer is almost just that simple, Kyle. So there you go. A lot of wisdom on this conversation, or in this conversation. Generational holds with me. What do you think, I guess, in terms of we have all these big ideas, there's a lot of trends in the industry. We know omni-channel is one, and we've kind of touched around the edges of omni-channel, and we know that simply has a future because anything that is customer or consumer choice latitude based or driven always has a future because it's all about the experience. But what's a trend that you think is hyped or overblown right now?
Um, I don't know if it's hyped or blown. I was kind of going on a direction as far as, how do you use these products and services to really build relationships and keep that longevity of it. And so maybe the hyper trend is, quick account openings and, you know, you know, this industry. I mean, Step was acquired by Mr. Beast, and what's he going to do with the social media impact and all these influencers and they're receiving payments, and can you use that as these individuals kind of banking with them as these neobanks that you mentioned? I think maybe that's a trend, but I think to really dive into that is the relationship you can create with that individual during that hardship time, but then providing them banking products, a secured credit product, a credit product. They're going to need a loan at some point. They're going to need potentially to get a mortgage and looking at those deposits. So that's something I'd love to continue to dive in with you all on that. I know we've had some high level conversations, but just as an example, one of the other categories, if you will, around these social impact type programs that we're seeing is through a company called Point Source Youth. And they focus on youth homeless prevention. So providing a direct cash assistance transfer to these youth homelessness coming out of foster care. And when they provide that, they're seeing about 90% are remaining housed after a year. So they're not going back into the system. And, for us, it's giving them, the money on a card, letting them spend it, letting them move to the Venmo account, kind of manage it as they want to. But is there an opportunity to engage with that youth, with that, organization that's supporting them and providing, a case manager, workforce development, all these other types of solutions, and then really build that relationship on the banking side? And so a question's always around credit and how do I get access to this? And I think OnePay, I just read something last week, is doing that with the Walmart product and having a credit, builder solution there. And so I think to me, that's where we'd like to continue to focus, through partnerships like you guys to really, continue to build that relationship with these users, give them a really good product, having a sense of community, providing offers as they continue to use the card. One thing that we're, having another kind of podcast tomorrow with that organization is how do you provide community for those youth? And so if every one of them signs up for a general purpose product, not just dispersing those funds as that kind of one-time engagement, now I'm in a pickle. Hey, you got money too. I could, I could borrow money from you, right? For dinner, lunch, whatever, and I could transfer the money right back to you. So if every one of them signs up for that disbursement product through this general purpose use where they can create multiple cards, they can create budgets, they can provide this direct deposit account to their employer, but build that sense of community, which is kind of helping, folks out in a time of need. I think that's also another, product that we really want to kind of dive into. It's really packaging it's working, to seamlessly, onboard and kind of get more of these organizations kind of stood up and using the product. And I think we would see some organic growth with that too.
I think that's well captured, and certainly in a sense of creating a community. So you kind of taken that first step. What's the next step now to keep engagement? We've gone through the effort of acquiring them. Now, how do we keep it something that they want to stay engaged with? How do we make it be the top of wallet solution or choice? How do we start to solve problems that they're going to encounter every day in their life? And how do you do it in a way that's simple and elegant?
Yeah.
And problem statements might not actually be problem statements as much as opportunity statements, saying it no differently, certainly when you get into business.
Yeah.
One thing that really stands out to me, Kyle, is you have a big career. We talked around the edges of it. You're a visionary, you have a lot of great insight, but I feel like you also mentioned you have a family of 4, which I think totals now to 6. So in terms of, what's more difficult? What's harder? Closing deals in the fintech space or running a household?
I've got a great supportive wife, so running the household is sometimes can be a little bit easier because I'm on the road quite a bit. So she's super supportive, and obviously all the activities that her kids are going to do. It's definitely a balance. So I really enjoy what we do. The partnerships we have, the company, the team that we work with, the partners like yourself that we have. It's an interesting stage right now because, my oldest is 17. He's going away to college next year. I've got a 15, 12, and soon to be 13-year-old daughter, and then a 10-year-old. And so they're all active in sports. And so, there's never really a dull moment. Weekends are busy and it's back to Monday. It's the grind, but, I love it. And I'm involved in all the, kids stuff and their activities, and I coach them. That's what obviously keeps me going and driving forward. I think the change of the pace of this, is a challenge, and staying in front of it and having, products and teams and technology resources to kind of stay ahead of that, is something that, a lot of companies are challenged with, us included. So I don't know, man, I'll call it a tie.
All right. Yeah, we'll take ties. It's a photo finish. I mean, they're both difficult. And keeping along the lines of a personal question, in the run up to closing here, how has being a dad changed how you feel about things like risk, money, or how you even define success? Has that had an impact or input on really what you're trying to get out of your career or the industry?
Man, that's another great question. I would say I've always been a saver kind of planner growing up. I mean, I worked when I was young, riding my bike to the swim club every day when I was, 14 years old, and cutting grass as a kid and neighbors. And I bought a house when I was 23, right after school. So I've always been driven with that. I would say my outlook changed a little bit. Maybe 6 years ago, we actually lost my wife's father unexpectedly. And he was 69. He was going to retire next year, and, saw him on one day and didn't the next. And so I've kind of thought differently about saving and money and just enjoying it and having fun. And I think we all, kind of see that in our career path. I love what I do for now, but, I want to enjoy it, as much as I can. Set a good example for the kids, have them work and, know what it's how hard it is to make $1 and spend it, and spend it wisely. And so, I try to do that as a dad. I mean, it's the most rewarding job I think, you could have, being a parent, and we've been fortunate with 4, healthy kids. So I'm excited for the journey. I got a lot more, lot of years left in the career path, but going to try to enjoy as much as I can.
Yeah, it sounds like your career path might have maybe more years than there is between you guys being empty nesters. It sounds like that might be coming up in the next 5 or 6. So we'll stay tuned and see how you folks work through that, Kyle. The last question I guess that we'd ask, and we appreciate you being so open with your personal life. We love to connect with folks, is what keeps you going outside of work? Is it the family, or is it a hobby? Kind of what is it? Could you unpack that?
Yeah, a family for sure, first and foremost. I was kind of thinking about this earlier. I was actually at a work trip last week in New York, and my kids are playing baseball now. And so the fact that I could jump on my Game Changer app and watch, live video of my son batting is cool. And, you still miss some of those moments, but obviously family's, what drives. I really enjoy doing outside yard work and, landscaping the house and, helping neighbors if they need to, and working with my kids through that, and, kind of keeping them busy. So my older boys have been kind of helping me lately. We're trying to get the house ready for a graduation party in the summer. And then also my son plays baseball. So we're doing like a senior event, hosting them in a couple weeks. So really enjoy outside work. So that's kind of what keeps me going. Family and that.
Well, Kyle, we appreciate you joining us on the podcast here today. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
And that engaging dialogue was powered by Sunrise Banks, member FDIC, equal housing lender.
Thanks for listening to the Social Currency Podcast by Sunrise Banks.
If you've enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, click like and subscribe anywhere you get your podcast content.
We'll see you soon.